But of course, individual responsibility comes from leadership. So leadership decides the pace and the direction everybody should go.
Hapa tumepatana na msanii wa sanaa anaitwa Juliani. Juliani, hebu tuonyeshe kwanza hii. Sitasimama ukiangalia kamera hii before tuanze.
Mkitaka perform pale muisikie. Bana nashukuru.
Bro, inakuaje kuanzisha kukama up na idea kama hii kuhakikisha kwamba Afrika inajisimamia, ukanda wa Afrika kujitegemea haswa katika kuyatunza na kuyalinda mazingira?
Atu come up na idea. What happened is that there's kuna group ya wana harakati, artists, community, grassroots organizations, everything wamekaa pamoja akasema hiyo African Summit inaendelea, Climate Summit inaendelea, I represent maono ama mawazo ya Wakenya ama Afrika venye nafaa kuwa. There's a way it needs to be looked at, na hiyo summit iko taken over by interests zile ziko na ubinafsi kidogo. So the reason why tunafanya hii ni ya watu sasa. Watu wanasema hii ndio yetu.
Hii sasa ndio hustlers wenyewe.
Hii ndio yetu sasa. So ndio because sisi tuko na, we know the effects of climate change. We know what needs to be done. Pia sisi watu wa bright, we know what needs to be done to make our countries and for us to adapt venye nafaa.
Kwa hivyo kukama up na idea kama hii, naona hapa bendera hii inawakilisha takriban mataifa 56. Nikiangalia vizuri kabisa, hii inahakikisha kwamba taifa la Kenya lipo ndani, Tanzania ipo ndani, Uganda, kuyataja tu baadhi ya mataifa ambayo yanawakilishwa hapa. Labda ukiangalia kwenye hii event, wageni wangapi ambao wamefika kutoka katika mataifa haya mbalimbali?
Siwezi kuambia kwa upana nani na nani, but najua hii na represent over 500 organizations wako hapa. So wametuma representatives zao. So hiyo ni international na local organizations, yeah.
So baadhi ya yale maovu ambao unasema huwezi ukasimama ya kitawala ni kama kuangusha miti. Tumeona baobab kule coast, watu wamelia sana, miti inaangushwa, na rais amesema kwamba tupande takriban miti bilioni 15, lakini ingine inakatwa. Utasema nini kuhusu hilo wakati ambapo miti inakatwa?
Yeah, makes sense, ni double speak sana. So huwezi sema hivi na hivi saa zingine. But also tunasema hii event ku happen ni poa. But agenda needs to be specific to what we need as African and what matters to us as African. Hiyo ni mambo ya financing, mambo ya adaptation, whatever. It needs to have agenda Africans who may decide. Sio watu wa nje wanakama natuambia Kenya tunafaa kufikiria ama venye tunafaa kufikiria.
Ukiangalia haswa mazingira tunapozungumzia hizi barabara zetu, nikiangalia kama pale naona ile ni chupa ya maji. Watu wanatupa taka sana hata kwenye drainages hizi barabara. Unafikiri ni kipi ambacho tunafaa tufanye kama vijana na haswa kama sisi wenyewe wa Kenya kuhakikisha kwamba tunayatunza na kuyalinda mazingira yetu?
Ni individual responsibility too, but of course individual responsibility comes from leadership. So leadership decides the pace and the direction everybody should go. So ukiongea kuhusu laws and namna za nchi venye wanafaa kufanya vitu, leadership inaamua. So na uingie kuhusu takataka tu, unaongea kuhusu hizi masaiti, unaongea kuhusu electric cars. Hizo electric cars, hizo battery kisha charge ama kisha umuhimu, itaenda wapi? Itatupwa wapi? So we have to look at the full picture, the end-to-end game, yeah, sustainability and what it costs to be sustainable. Ukiongea kuhusu having wind power, what does that mean? Geothermal, what does that mean? Ukiongea kuhusu gari kukua, what does that mean to the ripple effect? Ama is it agenda? Maybe kutembea ni better. Maybe kuwa na shule next to your neighborhood is way better than lazima utoke hapa uende ufanye shule huko. So maybe that's what helps. So you need to have a holistic view on the whole sustainability system, financing and whatever. But isikuwe tu agenda nyinyi mnaamua alafu mna copy paste.
Okay, you can just start by your name and tell us why are we here, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rukia. I'm from South Africa and I'm here at the People's Climate Assembly. And it happens on the sidelines. It's taking place on the sidelines of the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week, where essentially not all civil society is able to participate. The agenda has been set already, and so we are collectively creating space for civil society to come together to talk about what aches them, where the climate crisis affects them the most, what it feels like when you're at the coal face, at the cold front of droughts and floods and loss and damage. And so we've come together, music, song, poetry, testimonials. We had the Maasai bless the soil and invite us in. Indigenous communities from all over Africa have gathered, and that's essentially what we are here for, is to continue to create voice, agency and rights and access for everyone to engage around the climate crisis in Africa.
Maybe someone may argue that it's only in Kenya that we witness floods and matters. That is where we have seen most families losing their family, friends, and even the domestic animals following the floods. This has caused so many families pain. What will you say? Maybe in your country, you've said you come from South Africa. Do you ever witness such a kind of calamities?
Oh, what a good question. Absolutely. In the province called KwaZulu-Natal, for the past few years, we've experienced heavy drought, heavy floods, real floods that just wipes out everything, wipes out crops, wipes out livestock, wipes out people and families and homes. And then we have other parts of our country in South Africa where you've got severe drought. Where I come from, in the Western Cape of South Africa, where we've got livestock dying, for lack of access to water, crops that aren't able to grow, families that live on a cup or less water a day. So we experience both, and we experience that across Africa. Really, there is no country in our continent that can say we're not impacted by the climate crisis, by drought and floods. But even more importantly, not more importantly, maybe equally important, is that the same kind of floods and droughts and severe temperatures that we are experiencing in Africa, we are also seeing experienced in Europe, in the north and in the west. There they're having floods and droughts, and the climate is changing, in most part due to the crisis that the north and the west has created, right? So we experience it here in Africa, but the problem starts in the north and starts in Europe. And so we're all experiencing it. And so, in a sense, this is a global crisis that we are facing. And what do we need then to respond to the global crisis, I think, is the important question to be asking. And so, to your question again, absolutely. We experience both, yeah.
In Africa, we have 50 plus countries. Do you think Africa has done enough to tackle this calamity?
No, we have not done enough yet. It's not too late. We can still do more. We have not done enough yet. I think we're just beginning to understand the extent of the crisis for us. That's why we're having this in Africa, right? The Africa Climate Summit. We've got Climate Week happening all over the world, and in rotations. But for us, we're having a Climate Week, an Africa Climate Week and Summit, because we understand the severity of the situation. And I think there's a lot more that our countries and our governments can do. And hopefully they're having conversations about how they can really genuinely come up with transformative approaches to address the crisis. And, and the responsibility of both the North in addressing the crisis in Africa, as well as our own government's responsibility to do that.
Bro, I can see you are wearing African Activists for Climate Justice. That's Oxfam. And this event is happening while yet to have another event at the KICC. Why are we not at the KICC?
Well, why are we not at the KICC? This happens to be more like a side event for the people. And if you go to this KICC, you know the caliber of people that are there. It's not everybody that has access to the KICC. But here, everybody has access to the KICC. And what we are promoting is to have the voices of the voiceless to be heard. African voices that cannot be heard. Those people that cannot be there can be here to express their voice, to express their concerns, their position on climate action, climate change. And we feel this place is a platform for everyone, and that's why we are here. We are also at the KICC, but we are also identifying with the people on ground here so that we can amplify their voices.
Do you think the government has done enough to make sure that Africa makes a change that will live forever to be remembered?
Well, we are happy that this conference is happening here in Kenya, Nairobi. It's Africa, and so we want to own this conference. We want to own this meeting this time around. And what does that imply? It implies our supporting our government, rallying around them, pushing out our voices, shouting out to them to push the right stories out, to push the right narratives out, to push the right messages, because we feel they have not done enough. And in so doing, with our voices, if they can listen to us, they will get it right, because they will be telling the whole world the right message as it affects our people, Africans, in this session. And so this is Africa, and we want them to hear African voices. So they have not done enough.
Speaking of matters climate, we have seen counties like West Pokot. When we have floods, people have lost their lives, their wildlife, their animal that is domestic. And this thing has also been seen in other counties like Wajir and even Kajiado. What do you think the government should do, or the plans that should be put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen?
Well, you see, like you mentioned, flooding. I am from Nigeria, and last year we had one of the most devastating floods in the history of our country. Where over 1 million people were displaced, over 500,000 homes were destroyed, over 500, 600 lives were lost, and farmlands were flooded. People till today are still in the IDP camps because they have been displaced. And guess what? This year, the prediction for the floods is even going to be more than that of last year. So what is the government doing about it? But again, all of it is around climate change. The impact of climate change is what is causing all this flooding. And that is why, with this placard I'm holding, operationalize loss and damage. We believe Africans have contributed little to this whole menace of climate change. So what is the international community doing about it? Particularly the global north, who have made commitments. We are asking for them to operationalize, to put into action all those commitments they have made. Where will these commitments go to? It will go to what is called mitigating this flood impact and effects, helping our people to adapt, to be prepared for these floods. If a flood happens in America, they are well prepared, their economy is prepared to absorb it, they have the manpower, the skills to handle it. But we in Africa, we don't have that. We are really suffering, particularly our people, the poorest of the poor. So that is why we are calling on them, operationalize, put into action your commitments. Loss and damage is what we are talking about. You have suffered the impact so much, so we want them to do something about it by saying, yes, this is what we committed to, and we are ready to, support and to operationalize these things so that Africans and the society and the communities in Africa can have more like a compensation, but also to help them to live in the reality that is befalling them, because you cannot take climate change away. You can only mitigate and adapt to it.
It's very interesting to have you in this segment whereby we're discussing matters climate change, and we have the climate summit which is now happening at the KICC. So why do we have this event on this very occasion day?
There has been huge frustration among Kenyan and African NGOs at how the Africa Climate Summit, which could have been a wonderful opportunity to advance African solutions, became a space that really just advanced corporate and Western agendas. Africa has a really important agenda to ensure support for the very critical renewable energy, agroecology, support for communities harmed by climate impacts. But instead, that conference over there is opening its doors to, in fact, people from Europe, from where I'm from, to say, basically, to basically create false solutions. You know, there's a big agenda for what we call carbon offsetting. Now, carbon offsetting sounds like a solution to the climate change, but what it is a permit to pollute. And so that conference there is opening up Africa's lands, Africa's forests, to give corporations in the global north the opportunity to pollute. And it could drive land grabs, it could drive harm for African communities. So the civil society in Kenya is so angry that people weren't invited. The real people with the real solutions were not invited to that conference. And instead, it was what they call greenwashing. Greenwashing is like when you paint your car green and say it's green, but you continue to pollute. So that conference, people are very upset because it was a missed opportunity and it could make the problem worse.
Speaking of polluting the environment, we've seen companies. There is a lot of smoke coming from these companies, and people out there have been suggesting that those that are in charge of those companies should be held to an account for polluting the environment. Do you think it's a good step? It's a good move to make sure that our environment is safe from pollution?
We think that governments need to take much stronger action to constrain the harm done by these corporations. We could have policies that say no more fossil fuel expansion. Instead, let's scale up renewable energy and meet the energy needs of the people. We could have policies that say no more destructive industrial agriculture practices that push people off the land, kill our soils and harm the climate. Instead, let's promote solutions for agriculture that really solve the climate and help farmers grow food in the face of erratic weather conditions. So policies really can do the trick. But also we have another opportunity for leverage, which is to tell the banks who are giving finance to these corporations, they can stop giving the money to those corporations. So as ActionAid, we've started launching a campaign, and we launched a report today called How the Finance Flows, which really shows how banks who have the power to stop the finance flows to these corporations, they literally could, if they chose, they could save the world. But instead they are sitting in the boardrooms, sipping their lattes maybe, and they don't care what is happening on the ground in Africa. So this campaign, we're working together with countries from across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe and America to say the banks need to listen, and we're going to bring the people's voices out so that they're confronted and have to hear them.
So in simple terms, in one word, you are saying that our presidents, our leaders, and everybody that is involved, they should come out from the boardrooms and engage with the people out here.
We want the banks to listen to the people on the ground. They can come out, they can engage, they can see the reality, but they don't just see, they don't just visit the community, give a clap and then go home and do the same. We want them to listen, we want them to act on the basis of what they are seeing. And they can change their banking policies so that they stop financing fossil fuels and fossil fuel expansion and stop financing harmful industrial agriculture.
You said you come from Sweden, but you now reside in Kenya. Can you give me a comparison between Sweden and Kenya that gives me a difference between your country and our country here now?
Actually, it's more complicated than that. I'm British and I live in Sweden now, but many years ago I lived in Kenya. So to compare the difference between UK or Sweden, where I live now, and Kenya, see, the countries in the global north are the ones that are responsible for causing the climate crisis. UK and Sweden have been polluting for for a century or more. They have got rich off the back of industrialization and pollution, but they are not the ones feeling the impacts of climate change. Instead, it is countries like Kenya who are suffering the impacts of climate change because the UK has been polluting for so long. And that is the fundamental injustice of climate change. And that is why we need to call for solutions that put justice at the center and make sure that people who have done nothing to cause the climate crisis get the support they need to cope with the impacts and transition to greener technologies and pathways.
Na kusema Waafrika, Wakenya, wewe lazima tujihusishe katika decisions zile zina happen kwa nchi yetu. Usikae tu pembeni alafu react. Na pia tunataka kuambia leadership, there is no way utaamua kitu kama sasa tuko kwa hii park. Hii park wamesema ilikuwa meant for magari na nini. Which ni sawa, but jana tulikama hapo on Sunday ni watu wanaitumia venye nafaa, unaona? So we need to be human centered ama people centered when we make decisions. We don't just make decisions because they look relevant that particular time. We need to make decisions that are take time to make na itakuwa na ripple effect kwa lives za say now and later. So that's what ningependa kusema.
Climate justice is gender justice. Any response to the climate crisis has to include women, indigenous communities, young women and youth at the forefront with voice, agency and rights. We demand a response to the climate crisis from all. We are ready. We're standing as civil society to play our role, but we need our governments, our leaders, the private sector and the rest of society to stand up with us. Stand up for our lives. Amandla.
Yeah, my parting shot is that let the polluters pay. Let them pay for the costs, for the loss, for the damages they have done to the world and to Africa in particular. Thank you.
We know that fossil fuels are the major cause of climate change. But industrial agriculture has been flying under the radar, and it is time to put them in the spotlight as the number 2 cause of climate emissions. And it is time to call out the banks on the other side of the world to stop funding destruction and to tell governments to start financing solutions. Thank you.
Mazingira ni yetu sote, afya ni yetu. Bango hili limesheheni matamshi kama na maandishi kama climate change after PWDS. Vile vile hapo wanasema let's try organic farming, na hapo wanasema destroying the planet is haram. Ndio baadhi ya maoni ambayo Wakenya wameandika hapa kuhakikisha kwamba Afrika inajisimamia na kupiga hatua katika kuyatunza na kuyalinda mazingira. Nikiripotia Mo Radio kutoka katika maegesho ya magari hapa katika uwanja wa Green Park hapa jijini Nairobi. Jina langu ni Ronnie Reagan.
Mo Radio 88.2 FM. We are in charge.